My daughter sold their house for $500,000 and gave all the money to my son-in-law to invest in his so-called digital business. 2 weeks later, they came asking me for a place to live, and I answered no. My son-in-law punched me in the face. That same day, I made a decision. I called my lawyer and his next move. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I'm 62 years old, and I never thought I'd see the day when my own son-in-law would raise his hand against me. But there I was, standing in my doorway with blood trickling from my nose, watching Henry's face twist with rage while my daughter Leah stood behind him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dad, please," Leah whispered, her voice barely audible. "We have nowhere else to go." 3 hours earlier, they'd shown up at my door looking like refugees from their own life. Leah's hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them. Henry kept pacing back and forth on my porch, running his hands through his hair and muttering under his breath. I'd never seen him this agitated before. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping aside to let them in. That's when the whole story came tumbling out. 2 weeks ago, they'd sold their beautiful 4-bedroom house for $500,000. $500,000. The house I'd helped them buy. The one where I'd watched my granddaughter take her first steps before she moved away for college. Gone. "Henry has this incredible business opportunity," Leah explained, her eyes bright with what I now realize was desperation disguised as hope. "Digital marketing, Dad. The future is online, and Henry's got connections with these amazing investors." I watched Henry nod enthusiastically, but something in his eyes made my stomach turn. "Did you know your daughter sold the family house?" the woman at the bank asked me softly. I stared at her across the desk, certain I had misunderstood. "Sold what house?" I whispered. "The Maplewood property," she replied carefully. "The one that sold for $500,000 last month." My hands froze around my purse strap, because that house had belonged to my late husband's family for 42 years. And as far as I knew, my daughter Emily and her husband Jason were still living there. But the expression on the bank manager's face told me something I wasn't ready to hear. The house was gone. And somehow everyone knew except me. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined a routine trip to the bank would unravel everything I believed about my family. At 68 years old, I had learned to appreciate quiet routines. Especially after losing my husband, Walter, 3 years earlier. Grief changes the rhythm of a house. Even now, sometimes I still expected to hear his footsteps in the hallway early in the morning or the sound of his coffee mug touching the kitchen counter. Instead, there was only silence. The kind of silence that settles deep into old walls. I lived alone in a small 2-bedroom condo outside Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't luxurious, but it was peaceful. I kept fresh flowers on the kitchen table, paid my bills on time, volunteered twice a week at the church pantry. Most evenings, I watched old movies with a knitted blanket across my lap and Walter's golden retriever, Benny, asleep beside me. It was a smaller life than the one I used to have. But it was steady. And after everything, steady felt like enough. Emily used to call me almost every day after Walter passed. Sometimes just to ask how long to bake a casserole or complain about Jason leaving his boots in the hallway again. I liked those calls. They made me feel needed. But over the past year, things had changed slowly. So slowly I almost convinced myself I imagined it. The phone calls became shorter, then less frequent. Sunday lunches turned into occasional visits squeezed between busy schedules and important meetings. Whenever I asked how things were going financially, Emily always smiled too quickly and said the same thing. "We're doing great, Mom." Jason usually said nothing at all. He had always been polite to me. Careful. Measured. The kind of man who wore expensive watches even before he could afford them. Walter never fully trusted him, though he rarely said it directly. "He's always chasing the next big thing," my husband told me once while we were cleaning out the garage years ago. Men who move too fast usually leave damage behind them. At the time, I thought he was being unfair. Jason was ambitious. That wasn't a crime. He talked constantly about investments, business opportunities, startup companies, real estate flips. Every holiday dinner somehow turned into a lecture about passive income or market timing. I usually smiled politely and passed the mashed potatoes. Truthfully, most of it went over my head. Walter understood those things far better than I did. And after he died, I stopped trying to keep up with financial conversations altogether. That morning at the bank had started like any other Tuesday. Rain tapped softly against my windshield as I drove downtown to renew a certificate of deposit Walter had opened years ago. The bank lobby smelled faintly of coffee and printer paper. Christmas decorations still lined the counters even though it was already mid-January. A young teller greeted me warmly and directed me to an office near the back. That was where I met Denise Harper. She looked to be in her early 50s, professional but kind-eyed, with silver streaks in her dark hair. She smiled when she saw my last name. Harrison, she asked. Any relation to Emily Harrison? I smiled automatically. She's my daughter. Something flickered across Denise's face then. Not surprise exactly. More like hesitation. Oh, she said softly. I see. At the time, I didn't think much of it. She pulled up my account information while making small talk about the weather. I answered absent-mindedly, smoothing the wrinkles from my gloves in my lap. Then she asked the question that changed everything. Did you know your daughter sold the family house? I remember blinking at her. Once. Twice. As if my brain needed extra time to understand the sentence. I'm sorry, I said. Denise looked suddenly uncomfortable. The Maplewood property, she repeated carefully. The proceeds from the sale were transferred through one of our investment divisions. My chest tightened. No, I said slowly. No, that can't be. Right. Emily still lives there. Denise's fingers paused over the keyboard. The sale closed 6 weeks ago, she said quietly. 6 weeks. I stared at the framed landscape painting behind her desk because suddenly looking directly at another human being felt impossible. 6 weeks. And no one had told me. Not my daughter. Not my son-in-law. No one. A strange numbness spread through my body. I thought about the Maplewood house instantly. The wraparound porch Walter painted every summer. The oak tree in the backyard where Emily used to hang a tire swing when she was little. The kitchen walls marked faintly with pencil lines tracking her height through elementary school. Walter's father built that house himself after returning from Vietnam. It wasn't just property. It was history. Maybe there's some confusion, I said finally, though my voice sounded distant even to me. Perhaps another Harrison family. It was definitely your daughter, Denise interrupted gently. Emily Harrison and Jason Harrison signed the closing documents together. Jason. Of course Jason was involved. I swallowed hard. What happened to the money? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Denise hesitated again. And that hesitation scared me more than anything else. I'm not sure how much information I'm allowed to discuss, she said carefully. But I assumed you already knew about the investment accounts. Investment accounts. The phrase landed heavily between us. Because suddenly I remembered every dinner conversation Jason ever hijacked. Every excited speech about opportunities. Every promise that big things were coming soon. And for the first time, a terrible thought crept into my mind. What if Emily trusted him too much? I forced myself to stay calm. What kind of investments? I asked quietly. Denise looked at me for a long moment. Then she leaned slightly forward in her chair. Mrs. Harrison, she said gently, I really think you should speak with your daughter directly. That was when I knew something was wrong. Truly wrong. Because people only speak that carefully when disaster is already sitting in the room with you. I left the bank 20 minutes later carrying renewal papers I barely remembered signing. Outside, the rain had stopped. The parking lot shimmered with cold gray light. I sat inside my Buick for several minutes without starting the engine. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I pulled out my phone twice to call Emily. Twice, I stopped myself. What would I even say? Did you sell your grandfather's house without telling me? Did Jason convince you to gamble everything? Do you even realize what you've done? Instead, I drove aimlessly through downtown Columbus while memories crowded my mind. Emily at age 7 running barefoot through the Maplewood backyard. Walter teaching her how to ride a bike in the driveway. Christmas mornings beside the stone fireplace. Family barbecues. Birthday cakes. Funerals. 40 years of life inside that house. Gone. Sold quietly like it meant nothing. By the time I reached home, the winter sun was already fading behind the clouds. Benny greeted me at the door, wagging his tail gently, unaware that my world suddenly felt unfamiliar. I hung my coat carefully, fed him dinner, turned on the kitchen light. Everything looked exactly the same. And yet nothing felt safe anymore. I opened the refrigerator and stared blankly at leftovers I no longer wanted. My appetite had disappeared somewhere between the bank office and the drive home. Instead, I made tea. Walter always said tea helped people think more clearly. I carried the mug into the living room and sat beneath the framed family photograph hanging over the fireplace. It had been taken 12 years earlier. Walter sat in the center smiling proudly, one arm around me and the other around Emily. Jason stood slightly behind them, handsome and confident in a navy sweater. At the time, we looked like a family that trusted each other completely. Now I studied Jason's smile differently. Not warmly. Carefully. The phone buzzed suddenly beside me, making me jump. Emily's name lit up the screen. For one foolish second, relief flooded through me. Maybe she was calling to explain everything. Maybe there was some misunderstanding after all. I answered immediately. "Hi, Mom," she said brightly. "Just checking in." Checking in. As if she hadn't hidden $500,000 from me. I gripped the mug tighter. "How are you, sweetheart?" I asked quietly. "Oh, busy," she laughed nervously. "Jason's working on something really exciting right now. Big opportunity. Things are finally moving for us." My stomach turned cold. There it was again. Opportunity. I looked up at Walter's photograph on the wall. And for the first time since his death, I wished desperately he were still here beside me. Because something told me our daughter was standing much closer to disaster than she realized. And somehow, I was the last person to find out. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the Maplewood house. The white porch swing Walter built by hand. The kitchen window above the sink where Leah used to wave at me when she was little. The oak tree in the backyard with Emma's initials carved into the bark. Gone. Sold quietly like none of it mattered. At 3 a.m, I walked into the kitchen and made tea I didn't really want. Benny, my old golden retriever, lifted his head from his bed beside the refrigerator and watched me silently. "Something's wrong," I whispered to him. He thumped his tail once against the floor. Dogs always know when a house feels different. By sunrise, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe Leah and Jason really had invested the money wisely. Maybe they planned to buy something bigger later. Maybe Walter had known more than I realized before he died. But deep down, another feeling kept pressing against my chest. Shame. Not because of what they had done. Because I hadn't noticed sooner. Mothers are supposed to know when their children are drowning. And somehow my daughter had been sinking right in front of me while I kept setting extra plates at Sunday dinners, pretending everything was normal. Around noon, I finally received a text from Leah. "Sorry about yesterday. Things are stressful right now." That was it. No explanation. No mention of the house. No mention of the money. Just stressful. I stared at the message for several minutes before replying. "Come have dinner tonight. Just you." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then disappeared. Then returned again. Finally, Jason. "Doesn't think that's a good idea." My stomach tightened. Not, "I can't." Not, "We're busy." Jason doesn't think that's a good idea. I suddenly realized how often my daughter had started speaking through her husband. I typed slowly. "You're my daughter. You don't need permission to see me." This time, no answer came. Outside, cold November wind bent the trees along my street while clouds darkened the afternoon sky. I stood by the living room window holding my phone, waiting for another message that never arrived. By 6 o'clock, I stopped pretending she would come. I ate alone at the kitchen table while the roast chicken dried out under warm light. Walter used to say loneliness sounds louder during dinner. He was right. The next morning, I drove to the bank. Not because I fully understood what I was looking for. Just because instinct told me something about Jason's story didn't make sense. The bank lobby smelled like coffee and floor polish. Christmas decorations already hung near the front windows even though Thanksgiving had barely passed. A young teller greeted me politely before directing me toward an office in the back. The woman who met with me introduced herself as Denise Harper. Late 50s. Professional. Kind eyes. The kind of woman who had probably spent years watching people fall apart quietly across polished desks. "What can I help you with today, Mrs. Holloway?" she asked. I folded my gloves carefully in my lap. "I need to ask a strange question." She smiled gently. "Those are usually the important ones." I hesitated, then finally said it aloud. "My daughter sold her house recently. I'm trying to understand where the money went." The moment the words left my mouth, something shifted in Denise's expression. Tiny, but noticeable. Like she suddenly understood more than she expected. "Your daughter is Leah Richardson?" she asked carefully. My heart skipped. "Yes." Denise glanced toward the office door before lowering her voice slightly. "I'm not sure how much information I'm allowed to discuss." Fear moved coldly through my stomach. "What kind of information?" She folded her hands together slowly. "Mrs. Holloway, were you aware your daughter and son-in-law attempted to use your property as collateral last month?" For a second, I thought I had misheard her. "My what?" "Your home." The room suddenly felt too warm. Denise reached carefully for a folder beside her desk. "A loan request came through connected to your address approximately 3 weeks ago." I stared at her. "That's impossible." "I thought there may have been confusion," she said gently. "But your daughter's name was attached to the application." My chest tightened so hard it physically hurt. "What kind of application?" "A $75,000 personal loan." I felt the air leave my lungs. "No," I whispered immediately. "No, Leah would never do that." But even as I said it, I remembered Thanksgiving. Jason speaking for her. The panic in her eyes. The missing house. Denise slid a photocopy across the desk carefully. There was supporting documentation claiming partial ownership transfer. I looked down and saw my signature, or something painfully close to it. The edges of the paper blurred slightly, because I had never signed anything transferring ownership of my home. Ever. "That's forged," I said quietly. Denise didn't answer immediately, which terrified me more than if she had argued. Finally, she said, "The loan was approved initially, but flagged during secondary review because of inconsistencies in the documentation." "Approved?" "Yes." I gripped the arms of the chair tightly. "How much money did they get?" $75,000 was temporarily released before the investigation freeze. The room fell silent. Outside the office window, snow had started drifting lightly across the parking lot. I suddenly remembered Jason talking constantly about cash flow problems during the summer. Little comments I ignored at the time. Temporary setbacks. Liquidity issues. Investors delaying transfers. Walter used to say desperate men leave clues everywhere. You just don't notice them until afterward. "Where's the money now?" I asked. Denise hesitated again. "It appears most of it was moved quickly into multiple external accounts." External accounts. Another phrase designed to sound normal while hiding disaster. I looked back. Down at the forged signature. My name. My handwriting. My home. Used by my own daughter and her husband. A strange numbness spread through me. Not rage. Not yet. Something colder. The realization that this situation was much larger than a failed investment. "Mrs. Holloway," Denise said softly, "I strongly recommend you speak with an attorney." Attorney. The word echoed heavily inside my chest. Because up until that moment, part of me still believed this was all just misunderstanding. A mistake. A financial mess. But banks do not recommend lawyers for misunderstandings. I drove home slowly through falling snow. Every red light gave my thoughts more time to spiral. Had Leah known the signature was fake? Or had Jason convinced her I signed something months ago and forgot? Was she desperate? Manipulated? Or already too deep into whatever this was to tell truth from lies anymore? By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were shaking. Benny greeted me at the door, wagging his tail softly, while the house settled around me with familiar creaks. Safe. Quiet. Still mine. At least for now. I hung my coat carefully and walked into Walter's old study. Most of his things were still there. Reading glasses, pens, legal pads, the brown leather chair he used every evening. I sat down slowly behind his desk and stared at the framed photograph beside the lamp. Walter holding Leah on his shoulders at Cedar Point when she was 8 years old. She looked so happy, so safe. I touched the edge of the frame gently. "What happened to our little girl?" I whispered. The house gave no answer, only silence. And for the first time since Walter died, I truly felt afraid of my own family. The next morning, I called Robert Henley. Walter used to joke that Robert knew more about our finances than we did. He had handled our wills, business paperwork, retirement planning, even the legal mess after Walter's younger brother passed away years ago. If something was wrong, Robert would know where to start looking. He answered on the second ring. "Diane?" His voice immediately softened. "Everything okay?" I almost said yes automatically. Women my age do that too often. Pretend things are fine. Because admitting fear feels embarrassing. But something inside me was too exhausted to lie anymore. "No," I said quietly. "I think something's very wrong with Leah." There was a brief silence. Then Robert said carefully, "Come to my office." An hour later, I sat across from him in a small conference room overlooking downtown Columbus while snow drifted softly past the windows. Robert looked older than I remembered. More gray around the temples. Reading glasses lower on his nose. But his eyes stayed sharp. The kind of eyes that notice details other people miss. I told him everything. Thanksgiving dinner. The missing house. The fake signature. The $75,000 loan attempt. Robert listened without interrupting. That frightened me. Lawyers usually interrupt when something sounds impossible. Robert didn't interrupt once. When I finished speaking, he leaned back slowly in his chair. Then he removed his glasses. "Diane," he said carefully, "how much do you know about Jason's business?" I laughed once. Short. Humorless. Apparently nothing. Robert folded his hands together. "That may be more accurate than you realize." A cold feeling spread through my stomach. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering directly, he opened a file drawer beside his desk and removed a thin folder. Not thick. Not dramatic. But something about the way he handled it made my chest tighten. "I didn't want to worry Walter before he passed," Robert said quietly. "Especially while he was sick. But he asked me to look into Jason approximately 8 months before his death." I stared at him. "Walter investigated Jason?" Robert nodded slowly. "He became concerned after Jason repeatedly pressured Leah about refinancing the Maplewood property." Memories surfaced immediately. Jason constantly talking about unlocking equity. Walter growing strangely quiet during family dinners. The tension I noticed, but never fully understood. He never told me. He didn't want conflict with Leah. That sounded exactly like Walter. He avoided direct confrontation whenever possible, especially with our daughter. Robert slid the folder toward me. Inside were printed documents. Business registrations. Credit reports. Court records. Most of it meant nothing to me at first glance. Then I noticed one word repeated across multiple pages. Dissolved. Business entity dissolved. Company dissolved. Partnership dissolved. Over and over again. "How many businesses has Jason had?" I asked quietly. Robert sighed. "Officially? 7 in the last 10 years. 7. I stared down at the paperwork. "But he talks like he owns one successful company." "He talks very well," Robert replied carefully. That sentence stayed with me. He talks very well. Not, he succeeds well. Not, he earns well. Talks well. I suddenly remembered how often Jason avoided specifics. Everything was always investors, growth, expansion, digital systems, future, scaling, big words floating around empty rooms. "Has he ever actually made money?" I asked. Robert hesitated slightly. "Some short-term gains. Mostly through loans, refinancing, and investor contributions." Investor contributions. Another soft phrase hiding uglier truth. "You mean other people's money?" Robert looked at me sadly. "Yes." The room became very quiet. Outside, snow continued falling steadily across downtown Columbus, while cars crawled slowly through slush below. Walter knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to worry. Enough to investigate privately. And somehow, I missed all of it. He loved Leah too much to push harder, Robert said gently. He hoped Jason would eventually stabilize. But people like Jason rarely stabilize. They escalate. I looked back down at the paperwork. One page listed multiple lawsuits connected to unpaid debts. Another showed tax liens. Another showed a dissolved consulting company in Arizona. Then I saw something else. Another name. Not Jason Richardson. Jason Reed. I frowned. What's this? Robert's expression changed slightly. That, he said carefully, is something that concerns me most. He reached for another document. Jason legally changed his surname approximately 6 years ago. I felt my pulse quicken. Why? We don't know officially. My mouth suddenly felt dry. What was his original name? Robert looked directly at me. Jason Reed. I stared at him. That doesn't explain anything. No, he admitted. But changing identities while carrying significant debt usually indicates someone attempting to distance themselves from previous financial history. I suddenly understood why Walter had seemed uneasy around him all those years. Walter built his construction company slowly over 4 decades. Carefully. Patiently. He distrusted men who promised overnight success. And Jason always promised overnight success. Why didn't you tell me any of this sooner? I whispered. Robert's expression softened. Because none of it was technically criminal. Financial irresponsibility isn't illegal. No. But manipulation lived very close to it. I looked toward the snowy windows again. Leah had trusted this man completely. Sold her home for him. Signed loan paperwork involving my property for him. Possibly forged documents for him. Or maybe she had simply stopped asking questions. That possibility hurt even more. Do you think Leah knows? I asked quietly. Robert didn't answer immediately. Finally he said, I think your daughter desperately wants to believe her husband is successful. That answer told me everything. Not yes. Not no. Just desperately wants to believe. People ignore dangerous truths when reality feels too painful. I knew that from grief. After Walter died, I ignored unopened paperwork for nearly 4 months because seeing his handwriting made the loss feel real again. Denial is powerful, especially when love is attached to it. Robert leaned forward slightly. Diane, there's something else. The way he said it made my stomach tighten immediately. What now? 3 weeks ago, Jason contacted another attorney in Columbus. I frowned. About what? Your estate. The room suddenly felt smaller. My what? He asked general questions regarding inheritance structures involving adult children. I stared at him in disbelief. Robert continued carefully. He specifically asked how quickly property transfers occur after death when there's only one surviving child. Cold spread slowly through my chest. Not panic. Something worse. Recognition. Because suddenly every strange moment from the last year rearranged itself differently in my memory. Jason asking detailed questions about my retirement savings, my health, my medications, my will. At the time, it sounded conversational. Now it sounded calculated. He's planning something, I whispered. Robert stayed silent. Which was answer enough. I rubbed my hands together slowly. They felt freezing. Diane, Robert said gently, I need to ask you something uncomfortable. I nodded. Has Jason ever brought you food, drinks, vitamins, supplements, anything like that recently? The question startled me. Then memories surfaced immediately. Jason bringing expensive imported coffee last month. Leah insisting I try herbal sleep gummies for stress. A strange drowsiness after Sunday dinners I blamed on grief and age. My stomach turned violently. Oh my God. Robert's eyes narrowed slightly. What? There were nights I felt foggy. I hated saying it aloud. Because suddenly paranoia no longer felt irrational. It felt possible. Robert leaned back slowly. I think we should schedule a medical evaluation. Fear settled heavily into the room. Not dramatic fear. Quiet fear. The kind that arrives when ordinary life suddenly stops feeling safe. I looked down at Walter's old wedding ring still resting on my hand. He had tried to warn me, maybe in the only way he knew how. But grief had made me soft. Loneliness had made me trusting. And Jason had noticed both. Robert slid a business card across the desk. Private investigator. Marcus Webb. Former financial crimes investigator. I think it's time we learn exactly who your son-in-law really is, Robert said quietly. I picked up the card slowly. Outside, snow continued falling across the city. Cold. Silent. Relentless. And, for the first time, I realized the story was no longer about money. It was about survival. I didn't call the private investigator immediately. For 2 days, the business card sat untouched on Walter's old desk beside a cold cup of coffee I kept forgetting to drink. Part of me still wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation for everything. People my age grow up believing family problems can be solved quietly, privately. You don't investigate your own daughter's husband like a criminal. You pray. You wait. You hope. Things calm down. But deep down, I already knew this wasn't normal anymore. Because normal people do not forge signatures. Normal people do not secretly sell family homes. And normal men do not ask lawyers how inheritance transfers work after someone dies. By Friday morning, I finally picked up the card. Marcus Webb answered after 2 rings. His voice sounded calm. Careful. The kind of voice that probably spent years listening to lies professionally. This is Marcus. My attorney Robert Henley gave me your number, I said quietly. My name is Diane Holloway. There was a brief pause. Then, yes, Mrs. Holloway. Robert told me you might call. That sentence unsettled me immediately. Might call. Like he already expected trouble. We agreed to meet that afternoon at a small coffee shop downtown instead of my house. Marcus said he preferred neutral locations. People become nervous when investigators appear at residential properties, he explained. That alone told me his world operated differently than mine. The cafe smelled like espresso and cinnamon pastries. College students typed on laptops while soft jazz played overhead. Marcus looked younger than I expected. Mid-40s maybe. Broad shoulders. Simple gray coat. Nothing flashy. But his eyes missed nothing. He noticed my shaking hands before I even sat down. You haven't been sleeping, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. No, he nodded slightly like that confirmed something. After we ordered coffee, he opened a thin notebook. Start from the beginning, he said. So I did. The house sale. The missing money. The forged documents. Jason asking questions about my estate. The strange exhaustion I'd been feeling recently. Marcus listened carefully without interrupting, only occasionally writing small notes. When I finally finished, he leaned back slowly. Mrs. Holloway, he said carefully, I need to ask you something difficult. My stomach tightened. Okay. Has your son-in-law isolated your daughter from friends or family over the past few years? I thought about it. Really thought about it. And suddenly details I ignored before started rearranging themselves differently. Leah stopped attending church regularly after marrying Jason. She rarely visited old friends anymore. Family gatherings became shorter. Jason usually controlled where they went, when they left, who they spent time with. Even Emma called less after moving to California. At the time, I blamed adulthood. Busy schedules. Marriage. Life changing. But now it looked different. Yes, I admitted quietly. I think he has. Marcus nodded once. That's common. Common. The word made me cold. Like this situation belonged to some larger pattern I never noticed before. He also speaks for her constantly, I added. Especially lately. Marcus wrote something down. Financial control usually follows emotional isolation, he said calmly. I stared at him. Are you saying Jason is abusing my daughter? Marcus chose his next words carefully. I'm saying men involved in financial exploitation often create dependency first. Dependency. Another ugly truth hidden inside a calm word. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, but it no longer felt warm. What exactly do you investigate? I asked quietly. Mostly fraud cases. Elder exploitation. Financial coercion. My chest tightened again at the word elder. I hated suddenly belonging to that category. People my age spend years trying not to feel old. Then one day someone gently explains you may have been targeted because of it. Marcus reached into his leather folder and removed several printed documents. These are public records connected to Jason. I looked down slowly. Multiple business dissolutions, debt filings, tax disputes, failed lawsuits. Everything Robert showed me. Then Marcus slid another page forward. This one included photographs. Jason standing beside unfamiliar people. Mostly women. Older women. Different cities. Different years. But always Jason smiling confidently beside someone wealthier than him. Who are these people? I whispered. Marcus folded his hands together. Previous business associates. Something about the way he said it made my stomach turn. What kind of associates? The kind who lost money. I looked closer at one photograph. A silver-haired woman standing beside Jason outside a luxury condo building in Scottsdale, Arizona. She looked proud, happy, trusting, exactly the way Leah looked beside him now. She invested in one of his startup ventures approximately 4 years ago, Marcus explained. According to court filings, she lost nearly $300,000. $300,000. The number sat heavily between us. What happened to Jason? He declared bankruptcy under his previous legal name shortly afterward. I stared at the photograph again. Then another. Then another. Different women. Different states. Same smile. Same polished confidence. My hands suddenly felt cold. Are you telling me my daughter married a con artist? Marcus didn't answer immediately. Finally he said, I'm telling you your son-in-law follows very recognizable behavioral patterns. Professional people always phrase terrible things politely. But I understood him perfectly. I looked down at the papers again. One detail kept bothering me. These women, they're all older. Marcus nodded. Yes. Why? Because older targets usually have more financial stability, property equity, retirement savings, life insurance. Targets. Not victims. Targets. I suddenly remembered Jason asking detailed questions after Walter's funeral. How much insurance had Walter left? Was the Maplewood property fully paid off? Had I updated my estate documents? At the time, it sounded caring. Now it sounded like inventory. I felt sick. Marcus lowered his voice slightly. There's another reason I wanted to meet in person. Fear tightened instantly inside my chest. What now? We pulled banking activity connected to the $75,000 loan attempt. I stared at him. You can do that? Legally accessible portions, yes. He slid another document across the table. Several wire transfers. Large amounts. Accounts I didn't recognize. Then one line caught my eye. A payment to a luxury resort in Las Vegas. Another to a private car service in Miami. Another to something labeled Westlake Digital Holdings. Is that Jason's company? I asked. Marcus looked at me steadily. No registered business exists under that name. The cafe suddenly felt too loud. Too crowded. I lowered my voice instinctively. So where did the money go? We believe multiple shell accounts are being used. Shell accounts. Another phrase ordinary people never expect to hear connected to family. I looked around the cafe slowly while anxiety crawled through my chest. People nearby laughed over coffee. Students studied for exams. Normal life continued around me while my own life quietly collapsed. How bad is this? I whispered. Marcus held my gaze carefully. I think your daughter and son-in-law are in serious financial trouble. I already knew that. But then he added quietly, and I think you may be the next financial solution. The words landed like ice water. Not because they sounded dramatic. Because they sounded logical. That frightened me most. I suddenly understood why Jason kept asking about my will. Why he pressured Leah to involve my property. Why they hid the house sale. Because $500,000 was already gone. And desperate people always look for another door to open. I swallowed hard. What should I do? Marcus answered immediately. Lock down every financial account you have. I nodded slowly. Anything else? Yes. His voice became quieter. Do not eat or drink anything your son-in-law gives you. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Because suddenly Robert's questions about supplements and coffee no longer felt paranoid. They felt connected. Marcus studied my expression carefully. He's brought you things recently, hasn't he? I thought about the imported coffee, the herbal gummies, the strange exhaustion after family dinners. And for the first time in my life, I felt genuine fear when thinking about sitting across from my own daughter and her husband. That night, I locked every door in my house. Not because I thought someone would break in immediately. Because fear changes ordinary habits. I checked the kitchen windows twice before bed. Turned on the porch light. Even moved Walter's old baseball bat closer to the front door without fully admitting to myself why. At 62 years old, I never imagined I would feel unsafe because of my own family. I barely slept again. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The refrigerator humming. Pipes shifting behind walls. Benny pacing softly through the hallway around 2 in the morning. And underneath all of it, thoughts. Endless thoughts. Had Leah really helped forge documents? Did she know Jason was using my property? Or had she become so emotionally tangled in his lies that she stopped questioning anything at all? Around sunrise, my phone buzzed on the nightstand beside me. Jason. Just seeing his name made my stomach tighten. Morning, Diane. Leah's worried about you. You've seemed confused lately. I stared at the message for a long moment. Confused. The word immediately bothered me. Not because of what it said. Because of what it suggested. Robert mentioned forged medical concerns. Marcus mentioned financial exploitation. And now suddenly Jason was planting the idea that I wasn't thinking clearly. Slowly. Carefully. Like someone laying groundwork. I typed back only 3 words. I'm perfectly fine. His reply came almost instantly. Good. Maybe we should all have dinner soon and clear up misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. Another soft word hiding something ugly. I didn't answer. Instead, I took the phone directly to Robert's office. He read the message twice before leaning back slowly in his chair. There it is, he said quietly. What? The narrative. I frowned. What does that mean? Robert folded his hands carefully. He's establishing a pattern that portrays you as emotionally unstable or forgetful. Cold spread slowly through my chest. You really think he'd try to claim I'm mentally incompetent? Robert gave me a long look. I think Jason is desperate. That answer frightened me more than certainty would have. Because desperate people don't think normally. And $500,000 was already gone. Robert picked up his office phone immediately. I'm scheduling a full cognitive evaluation today. I blinked. A what? A medical assessment confirming you're mentally competent. The sentence sounded surreal. 2 weeks earlier, my biggest concern had been whether to repaint the guest bedroom. Now I was proving my sanity because my son-in-law might try stealing my estate. Life changes quietly at first. Then all at once. By noon, I sat inside a private medical office. Across town answering memory questions from a calm older physician named Dr. Patterson. He asked me dates, addresses, medication history, family details. At one point, he handed me a sheet of paper with shapes and numbers to organize. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it felt absurd. I raised a daughter, buried a husband, helped build a construction business from nothing beside Walter for 35 years. And now I was drawing clocks on paper to prove I still understood reality. Dr. Patterson studied me carefully throughout the appointment. Finally, he removed his glasses. Mrs. Holloway, I see absolutely no signs of dementia or cognitive impairment. Relief moved through me so suddenly it nearly hurt. But then he added, however, your blood pressure is unusually elevated, and you appear physically exhausted. I smiled faintly. My family has been stressful lately. His expression remained serious. I'd also like to run a blood panel. Fear stirred immediately. Why? Because several symptoms you described, fatigue, brain fog, unusual drowsiness, can sometimes indicate medication interactions. Medication interactions. The phrase echoed heavily inside my chest. I thought about Jason's imported coffee again. The herbal gummies Leah insisted would help me sleep. The strange exhaustion after family dinners. Suddenly my hands felt cold. When will the results come back? I asked quietly. Tomorrow. Tomorrow suddenly felt very far away. When I returned home that afternoon, Leah's car sat parked in my driveway. My heart jumped painfully. For one foolish second, I thought maybe she finally came alone. Maybe she wanted help. Maybe she finally saw the truth. Then I saw Jason sitting in the passenger seat, watching the house. They didn't get out immediately. They just sat there, talking quietly, like they were rehearsing something. Finally, Leah stepped out carrying a paper grocery bag. Jason stayed inside the car. That detail bothered me instantly. Like he wanted control without direct involvement. Leah walked slowly toward the porch. She looked thinner than ever. Dark circles beneath her eyes. Hands trembling slightly from the cold. Or anxiety. "Mom," she said softly when I opened the door. I stayed inside the doorway. Not welcoming. Not hostile. Just careful. "Hi, sweetheart." She held up the grocery bag weakly. "I brought soup." Soup. My stomach tightened immediately. Because 24 hours earlier Marcus specifically warned me not to eat or drink anything from Jason. Leah noticed the hesitation on my face instantly. "It's just soup," she said quietly. I hated how guilty she suddenly looked. Like a child caught lying. "Where's Jason?" I asked. "In the car." Of course he was. Watching. Waiting. Monitoring. I stepped outside onto the porch and lowered my voice. "Leah, did Jason ask you to bring this?" Her eyes shifted away immediately. That answered enough. "Mom, he's trying." "No," I said softly. "He's managing." Tears filled her eyes instantly. "You don't understand what we're going through." I looked at my daughter carefully. Really looked at her. Her coat was old. Wrinkled. She had lost weight rapidly. And there was something else in her expression now. Fear mixed with exhaustion. People carrying secrets always look tired. "Where are you living?" I asked quietly. She hesitated too long. "Finally, with friends." Not true. I knew it immediately. "What happened to the money, Leah?" Her breathing changed slightly. Fast. Shallow. "Jason's investment got delayed." That's not an answer. It's complicated. "No," I said gently. "It's probably very simple." She looked like she might cry again. Then suddenly Jason honked the horn from the driveway. One short, sharp sound. Leah flinched immediately. That tiny reaction chilled me more than anything else. Conditioning. Control. Fear. All inside one small movement. "Mom, please," she whispered. "Can you just trust us a little longer?" Trust. The word nearly broke my heart. Because trust was exactly what had destroyed this family. I glanced toward Jason sitting behind the wheel staring directly at the house. Watching us. Calculating. Waiting. Then I looked back at my daughter. And, for the first time, I realized she might already be too deep inside his world to save herself. That night, I poured the soup down the sink. I stood there quietly watching noodles and broth disappear into the drain while guilt twisted painfully inside my chest. Because part of me still felt horrible for distrusting my own daughter. But another part. The quieter part. The older part. New instinct exists for a reason. Women survive by noticing what feels wrong long before they can explain it. And everything about Jason felt wrong now. I rinsed the bowl carefully and placed it upside down beside the sink just as my phone buzzed again. Leah. For one hopeful second, I thought maybe she had left Jason somewhere and wanted to talk honestly. Instead, the message read, "Jason thinks you're overreacting. He says Marcus Webb is manipulating you." I stared at the screen. There it was again. Jason always speaking through her. Always controlling the narrative before anyone else could. I typed slowly. "How does Jason know about Marcus?" 3 dots appeared immediately. Then vanished. No reply came. Cold spread through my chest. Because I had never told Leah the investigator's name. Not once. Which meant Jason already knew. Somehow. I immediately called Robert. He answered after one ring. "Diane? How does Jason know I hired Marcus?" Silence. Then, "He shouldn't." Fear tightened sharply inside me. "He texted Leah about him." Robert cursed quietly under his breath. "Lock your doors tonight," he said immediately. My stomach dropped. "You think he's watching me?" I think desperate people gather information aggressively. That wasn't comforting. After we hung up, I checked every window again. Turned off lights downstairs. Pulled curtains closed. The house no longer felt peaceful. It felt exposed. At around 9:30, Marcus called. "I need to see you tomorrow morning," he said. His voice sounded tighter than usual. "What happened?" "We found something connected to the offshore transfers." My chest tightened immediately. "Can't you tell me now?" "Not over the phone." That answer told me enough. I barely slept again. Around 4 in the morning, Benny suddenly growled low near the front window. Not barking. Growling. Deep. Warning. I walked carefully toward the curtains and peeked outside. A dark SUV sat parked across the street. Engine running. Lights off. Maybe. Coincidence. Maybe not. But when I looked again 10 minutes later, it was gone. The next morning, freezing rain coated the roads while I drove downtown to meet Marcus at Robert's office. Neither man looked relaxed when I arrived. Marcus spread several printed documents across the conference table immediately. "We traced portions of the house sale money," he said. My stomach twisted. "And? Most of it's gone." I closed my eyes briefly. $500,000. Walter's family home. Gone. But Marcus continued. However, several transfers led us to shell accounts connected to a known financial fraud investigation in Nevada. The room felt very still. What kind of fraud? Marcus looked directly at me. Romance scams. Elder targeting. Investment manipulation. The words landed heavily. Because suddenly Jason's pattern looked painfully obvious. Charm. Promises. Urgency. Control. Money disappearing. I sat down slowly. "You think Leah was targeted?" Robert answered quietly. "We think you were." Cold moved sharply through my body. "What?" Marcus slid another photograph toward me. This one showed Jason standing beside another older woman outside a restaurant in Phoenix. She looked elegant. Silver-haired. Expensive jewelry. The same trusting smile I once had around him. "She lost approximately $400,000 3 years ago," Marcus explained. "What happened to him?" "He disappeared before civil litigation completed." I stared at the photograph. Then another. Then another. Different women. Different cities. Same pattern. Same smile. Jason had done this before. Not once. Repeatedly. My chest suddenly hurt. Because that meant my daughter hadn't just married the wrong man. She married someone who entered our lives intentionally. Marcus seemed to read the thought on my face. "We believe Jason specifically targets financially stable families." Families. Not individuals. Families. I suddenly remembered how charming he acted when Walter was alive. How eager he seemed to help with small repairs around our house. How interested he always was in our finances without appearing obvious about it. At the time, it felt attentive. Now it felt strategic. Robert leaned forward carefully. "Diane, there's something else you need to know." I looked at him. The forged property documents weren't the only papers we found. Fear settled heavily into my stomach again. "What else?" Marcus slid another file across the table. Medical authorization forms. Power of attorney drafts. Copies of my signature. Or close imitations of it. My hands started trembling immediately. Oh my God. One document listed Leah as temporary financial guardian in case of cognitive decline. Another claimed I showed signs of memory impairment. I stared at the pages in disbelief. "They were preparing to challenge your competency," Robert said quietly. I couldn't speak for several seconds. Because suddenly everything made horrifying sense. Jason repeatedly calling me forgetful. Texting about confusion. Pushing conversations about my health. The supplements. The coffee. The drowsiness. They weren't random moments. They were groundwork. A slow narrative being built around me. Marcus lowered his voice carefully. "We also received your blood test results this morning." I looked up sharply. Dr. Patterson's office had sent copies directly to Robert. "There were low levels of sedative compounds in your system," Robert said quietly. The room disappeared around me for a second. "What?" Marcus spoke gently. "Nothing lethal. But enough to cause fatigue, confusion, brain fog." I gripped the edge of the table tightly. The coffee. The gummies. The dinners. I suddenly felt nauseated. They were drugging me? Nobody answered immediately, because technically they couldn't prove intent yet. But silence told me enough. I thought about Leah standing on my porch holding soup with trembling hands. Had she known? Or had Jason convinced her he was helping me? That possibility hurt worst of all. Because manipulation destroys victims differently. Some lose money. Some lose trust. Some lose the ability to recognize they're participating in harm. And I no longer knew which category my daughter belonged to. Marcus broke the silence carefully. Diane, I need you to understand something. I looked at him slowly. We believe Jason is escalating. What does that mean? It means he's running out of money. Fear moved through me again. Cold. Heavy. Relentless. Marcus continued quietly. People running sophisticated financial schemes usually disappear once funds collapse. Jason hasn't disappeared. Why? Because he believes there's still access to additional assets. My house. My savings. Walter's estate. Me. The realization settled slowly into my chest like ice water. I wasn't watching my daughter's marriage collapse anymore. I was watching predators corner their next financial target. And somehow, that target had become me. Robert slid another document across the table. Restraining order paperwork. Prepared already. Waiting. We can file this today, he said quietly. I stared down at the papers. My daughter's husband. The man who sat at my Thanksgiving table. The man Walter tolerated for years. The man Emma called family. And now I needed legal protection from him. My eyes burned suddenly. Not from fear. From grief. Because family betrayal doesn't feel dramatic at first. It feels quiet. Like realizing the people you opened your door to were studying the locks the entire time. I signed the restraining order just before sunset. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote my name across the final page. Not because I doubted the decision. Because I understood what it meant. There are signatures that close bank accounts. Signatures that sell homes. Signatures that bury marriages. And then there are signatures that quietly admit your family is no longer safe. This was one of those. Robert notarized the paperwork himself while Marcus reviewed additional financial records beside the conference room window. Outside, snow continued falling steadily across downtown Columbus. Cold. Gray. Endless. Once this is filed, Robert explained carefully, Jason cannot legally contact you or come near your property. I nodded slowly. What about Leah? The room became quiet. Marcus finally answered. She's more complicated. Complicated. Another polite word for heartbreaking. Because no matter how dangerous Jason looked now, Leah was still my daughter. Still the little girl who used to sleep beside our bed during thunderstorms. Still the teenager who cried for 2 days after her first breakup. And somehow now, she sat beside a man accused of drugging her own mother. I suddenly felt exhausted. Not physically. Soul-level exhausted. After the paperwork was finished, Marcus handed me a small envelope. What's this? Home security recommendations, he said. Alarm company. Camera installation. Emergency contacts. I stared at him. You really think I need all this? Marcus held my gaze calmly. I think Jason's losing control of the situation. That answer settled heavily into my chest. Because men like Jason survive through manipulation. And manipulation becomes dangerous when it stops working. By the time I drove home, darkness had already settled across the neighborhood. The porch light illuminated fresh snow gathering across the walkway, while Benny waited at the front window watching for me. For the first time in years, my own house felt unfamiliar. Not because anything had changed physically. Because fear changes spaces. The kitchen suddenly felt too exposed. The front windows too large. The silence too sharp. I locked the deadbolt immediately after entering. Then checked it twice. At around 8:30, my phone rang. Leah. I stared at her name for several seconds before answering. Mom? Her voice sounded shaky. Like she'd been crying. Yes. Jason said you filed something against him. Of course he already knew. Men like him always know quickly. I did. A long silence followed. Then, How could you do that to us? Us. Not to him. Us. That hurt more than anger would have. Leah, I said carefully, he forged documents involving my home. He explained that already. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course he had. Manipulative people always explain reality before victims can process it independently. He told me you signed papers months ago and forgot, she continued quickly. He said stress after Dad died affected your memory. There it was. The narrative again. Confusion. Forgetfulness. Mental decline. Slowly repeated until it sounds believable. Leah, I said softly, I passed a full cognitive evaluation today. Silence. Then, what? My doctor found no signs of dementia. None. For a moment, she said nothing. And I heard it. The crack. Tiny, but real. Because somewhere beneath Jason's influence, part of my daughter still knew me. Still knew I wasn't confused. He also found sedatives in my blood work, I added quietly. Her breathing changed immediately. Sharp. Uneven. What? The supplements Jason encouraged you to give me weren't herbal. Silence flooded the line completely. Then finally, no, not denial. Not anger. Fear. She didn't know, I realized suddenly. The thought hit me instantly. Leah truly believed she was helping me, which somehow made everything even sadder. Leah, I whispered, what exactly has Jason been telling you? Her voice broke apart slightly. He said you were struggling after Dad died. He said you were becoming forgetful. He said the vitamins would help your focus. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, because suddenly I could hear it clearly. The manipulation. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Careful. Layered slowly over years. He's lying to you, I said gently. No, she whispered immediately. But weaker this time. Not certain anymore. I pressed carefully. Leah, where are you living? No answer. Did you really lose the house? Another silence. Then finally, yes. The word barely came out. Tears burned behind my eyes instantly. Because hearing truth from your child after weeks of lies feels strangely painful. Not victorious. Painful. When? I asked softly. 2 months ago. 2 months. They had been pretending everything was normal for 2 entire months. Family dinners. Thanksgiving. Phone calls. All while hiding financial collapse. Where did the money go? Leah started crying quietly. Not dramatic sobbing. The exhausted kind. The kind people make when they already know their life is collapsing. Jason said investors pulled out unexpectedly, she whispered. Do you believe that? A long silence followed. Then quietly, I don't know anymore. That sentence told me more truth than anything else she'd said in weeks. Because certainty was finally breaking. I heard movement suddenly on her end of the line. A door opening. Then Jason's voice faintly in the background. Who are you talking to? Leah inhaled sharply. Nobody. Nobody. Not Mom. Not Diane. Nobody. Fear moved coldly through me again. Leah, I said quickly, listen carefully to me. But Jason's voice grew louder. Hang up. My daughter lowered her voice immediately. I have to go. No, you need to leave him. Silence. Then finally she whispered something that shattered my heart completely. I don't think he'll let me. The line disconnected. I sat frozen at the kitchen table staring at my phone long after the call ended. Because that sentence changed everything. Until then, part of me still believed Leah was simply foolish. Manipulated financially. Emotionally dependent. But now I understood she was afraid. And fear changes people. Fear keeps them silent. Fear keeps them loyal to dangerous men long after logic disappears. My phone buzzed again less than 2 minutes later. This time from Jason. Stay out of our marriage. No greeting. No explanation. Just control. I stared at the message while something inside me slowly hardened. Not rage. Clarity. Because predators rely on confusion. And for the first time since Thanksgiving, I was no longer confused. I forwarded the message directly to Robert and Marcus. Then I turned off my phone, locked the doors again, and sat alone in Walter's old recliner listening to winter wind move softly against the house. Somewhere out there, my daughter was trapped inside a life she no longer understood. And somewhere beneath all my grief, a colder realization was beginning to form. Jason wasn't finished yet. The next 3 days passed in complete silence. No calls from Leah. No messages from Jason. Nothing. That silence disturbed me more than arguments would have. Because manipulative people rarely disappear quietly unless they're planning something. Marcus agreed. They're regrouping, he told me over the phone Friday morning. The phrase sounded military. Cold. Strategic. And somehow that made the situation feel even more real. By then, security cameras had already been installed around my house. A small black camera near the garage. Another facing the driveway. One near the back patio Walter built 15 years earlier. I hated all of them. Not because they looked ugly. Because they represented a life I never wanted. A life where mothers needed surveillance because of their own children. That Friday afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table sorting old paperwork when the doorbell rang. My chest tightened instantly. Nobody visited unexpectedly anymore. Not after Walter died. Not after everything started falling apart. I checked the front camera monitor first. Leah. Alone. The moment I opened the door, I realized something was terribly wrong. Her mascara had smeared beneath swollen eyes. Her coat looked damp from snow. And she carried no purse. No phone. Nothing. Mom, she whispered. Then she started crying. Not graceful crying. Not controlled. The kind that comes from total exhaustion. I pulled her inside immediately and locked the door behind her. Benny rushed toward her, wagging his tail gently while she collapsed into a kitchen chair, trembling. What happened? I asked quietly. She wrapped both hands around a mug of tea I made her, but didn't drink. For several minutes, she couldn't speak. Finally, she whispered, "He took everything." I sat across from her silently. Sometimes people tell truth faster when nobody interrupts them. Leah stared down at the table. The investment accounts were fake. Even after everything, hearing the words out loud still hurt. How much is gone? All of it. $500,000. Gone. Walter's family home reduced to numbers disappearing through hidden accounts. I closed my eyes briefly. Where's Jason now? I don't know. That answer frightened me immediately. What do you mean you don't know? Leah swallowed hard. He left 2 nights ago saying he needed to meet investors in Chicago. Then his phone stopped working yesterday morning. Cold moved slowly through my chest. Leah. Tears slid down her face again. He emptied the last account before he disappeared. Of course he did. People like Jason never leave until every possible dollar is drained first. I kept my voice calm. How much debt do you have? She laughed once. Broken. Humorless. I don't even know anymore. That answer told me everything. Because financially manipulated people eventually stop tracking numbers altogether. The amounts become too terrifying. Leah finally looked up at me. And for the first time in months, she looked young again. Not childish. Just lost. Like someone waking from a very long nightmare. He said we were building a future, she whispered. Every time something failed, he had another explanation. I said nothing. He always sounded so sure of himself. That's how men like Jason survive. Confidence becomes camouflage. Leah wiped her eyes roughly. Mom, I need to tell you something. Fear tightened immediately inside my stomach. What? Her breathing became uneven. The forged signatures, she stopped. Then finally whispered, I signed some of them. The room fell silent. Not angry silence. Heartbroken silence. Because deep down, part of me already knew. Leah covered her face immediately. I thought it was temporary, she cried softly. Jason said he just needed access to emergency liquidity until investors transferred funds. Liquidity. Investors. The same polished words. Even now. I reached across the table slowly and lowered her trembling hands from her face. Did you know about the sedatives? Her entire body stiffened instantly. No, the answer came too quickly to be fake. I swear to God, Mom, I thought they were vitamins. I believed her. That was the tragedy. Jason didn't need evil partners. He needed desperate people willing to trust him. Leah looked around the kitchen slowly like she was seeing the house differently for the first time. He told me you were becoming unstable after Dad died. I swallowed hard. And you believed him? Tears filled her eyes again. At first, no. But then you started forgetting little things sometimes. Names. Appointments. Grief. The normal small memory lapses grief causes. Jason turned them into weapons. He kept saying he was worried about you, she whispered. He said if we didn't help manage things early, strangers would eventually take advantage of you. I almost laughed at the cruelty of it. Predators always warn victims about other predators. That's how they earn trust. Leah stared down at her untouched tea. I didn't realize he was isolating me until recently. What changed? She hesitated. Then quietly, I found messages. My chest tightened. What kind of messages? Other women. Of course. There are always other women. Not because men like Jason love people. Because they collect opportunities. Leah pulled a folded printout from her coat pocket with shaking hands. Emails. Hotel confirmations. Wire transfers. One message made my stomach turn immediately. She still trusts me completely. I looked up slowly. Leah nodded weakly. He was talking about you. The kitchen suddenly felt freezing. Leah's voice cracked again. I think he married me because of our family. Not love. Not partnership. Access. Walter's savings. The Maplewood house. My retirement accounts. Everything suddenly rearranged itself into horrifying clarity. Even the timing made sense now. Jason became more aggressive financially after Walter got sick. More interested in estate details. More controlling. Because dying people change financial landscapes. And Jason noticed. Leah wiped tears from her face again. He said successful people take risks. Every time something failed, he convinced me the next investment would recover everything. Classic manipulation. Hope mixed with urgency. Just enough optimism to keep victims from walking away. Then suddenly the doorbell rang. Both of us froze instantly. Not a polite ring. Sharp. Impatient. Leah's face lost all color. He found me. Fear moved visibly through her body. I stood slowly and checked the security monitor beside the hallway. Jason. Standing on my porch. Snow falling softly around him while he stared directly at the camera. Calm. Expressionless. Like a man arriving to collect something he believed still belonged to him. Leah started shaking. Don't let him in. I looked back at her carefully. Then toward the monitor again. Jason smiled slightly at the camera. Not warmly. Knowingly. And, for the first time, I realized he wasn't nervous at all. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Snow drifted quietly across the porch camera screen while Jason stood outside my front door with his hands inside his coat pockets. Calm. Too calm. That frightened me more than yelling would have. Leah stared at the monitor beside me, trembling so hard I could hear the porcelain teacup rattling. Softly against the kitchen table behind us. Don't answer, she whispered again. But Jason already knew she was inside. Of course he did. Men like him always know where their control is slipping. The doorbell rang again. Longer this time. Then my phone buzzed. Jason. I didn't answer. Another message appeared immediately. I just want to talk. Talk. The same word manipulative people use right before destroying peace inside a room. Leah suddenly grabbed my wrist tightly. Mom, please. I looked down at her hand shaking against mine. Then back at the screen. Jason stepped slightly closer to the camera. Still smiling faintly. Like a salesman waiting patiently outside a deal he planned to close. I made my decision quietly. Go upstairs, I told Leah. Her eyes widened. No, he won't leave if he knows you're here. Fear crossed her face instantly. I don't want to be alone. You won't be. For a second, she looked like the little girl who used to hide behind me during thunderstorms. Then slowly she nodded. I waited until I heard her footsteps disappear upstairs before walking toward the front door. Not quickly. Not emotionally. Walter used to say angry people surrender control first. And I was done surrendering anything. I opened the door just enough to keep the security chain locked. Cold winter air rushed inside immediately. Jason looked perfectly composed. Dark wool coat. expensive gloves, hair neatly styled despite the snow. If someone passed him on the street, they would probably think he was successful. Respectable. That's the danger of men like Jason. They package destruction beautifully. Diane, he said softly. I'm glad you answered. I'm not. Something flickered briefly behind his eyes. Not anger. Calculation. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Of course. Always misunderstanding. Never lies. Never fraud. Never manipulation. Just misunderstandings. I don't think forging my signature was misunderstood, I replied calmly. Jason exhaled slowly through his nose. That situation became more complicated than Leah explained. Interesting. Not than we explained. Leah explained. Even now he was repositioning blame quietly onto her. I noticed those details now. You need to leave, I said. Instead of moving, he glanced subtly past my shoulder into the house. Checking. Searching. Looking for Leah. She's upset, he said carefully. I'm worried about her mental state right now. The audacity nearly stunned me. This man had drained $500,000, manipulated my daughter for years, possibly drugged me. And now he was diagnosing her emotional stability. She's safer away from you. For the first time, his smile faded slightly. Diane, I think people around you are influencing your judgment. Marcus. Robert. The doctors. The investigators. Predators always isolate victims from outside voices first. I suddenly understood how long Jason had been practicing this technique. I'm not confused anymore, Jason. That landed. His jaw tightened slightly. Tiny, but noticeable. Because confusion was his advantage. Clarity threatened him. He lowered his voice. You really want to do this publicly? There it was. Not apology. Threat. Softly delivered. Polished. Civilized. But still a threat. I kept my hand steady against the door. You should leave before I call the police. Instead of reacting emotionally, Jason nodded slowly like he expected that answer. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. Walter would be devastated seeing this family torn apart. Walter. Even now he used my dead husband like leverage. I stared at him carefully. No, I said quietly. Walter would finally understand you. Silence settled between us. Cold air drifted through the doorway while snow gathered softly across the porch steps. For the first time since I met him, Jason looked uncertain. Only briefly. Then his phone buzzed inside his pocket. He glanced down instinctively. That tiny distraction changed everything. Because for 1 second, I saw panic. Real panic. Not polished confidence. Not control. Fear. And suddenly I realized something important. Jason wasn't here because he still held power. He was here because he was losing it. You're out of money, I said quietly. His eyes snapped back toward mine instantly. There. The truth. People only react that quickly when something lands directly on target. You don't know what you're talking about. But his voice changed slightly. Tighter. Faster. I continued calmly. The house money's gone. The fake companies are collapsing. And now Leah knows. His expression hardened immediately. She doesn't understand finances. No. She understood betrayal now. And that was much more dangerous to him. Upstairs, I heard floorboards creak softly. Leah listening. Jason heard it too. His eyes shifted upward instantly. Then back to me. Tell her to come downstairs. No, his jaw flexed again. That calm mask was cracking slowly now. She's my wife. And she's terrified of you. For the first time, genuine anger flashed across his face. Quick. Sharp. Gone again almost immediately. But I saw it. Predators hate losing emotional control in front of witnesses. You've poisoned her against me, he said quietly. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because manipulative people always accuse others of exactly what they've done themselves. No, Jason. Truth did that. The wind moved harder suddenly, rattling the porch railing lightly. Jason looked over my shoulder again toward the inside of the house. Then his expression changed completely. Calm again. Controlled again. Too controlled. That frightened me. Because dangerous men become cold when emotion stops working. Diane, he said softly, you should think very carefully before involving law enforcement. My stomach tightened instantly. Not because I feared him. Because I recognized strategy. He still believed fear could move people. But something inside me had already changed. Grief does that eventually. You survive enough pain that intimidation stops feeling powerful. You should think carefully before coming near my house again. Another long silence. Then finally Jason nodded once. Slowly. Like a businessman closing a disappointing meeting. Tell Leah I love her. Lie. Even his affection sounded transactional now. He stepped backward off the porch into the falling snow. Then paused near the driveway. And looked directly into the security camera mounted above the garage. Smiling slightly. Not warm. Not friendly. A message. I watched until his SUV disappeared down the street. Then I locked the door. Immediately. My hands stayed steady this time. Upstairs, I heard movement again. A moment later, Leah appeared at the top of the staircase looking pale. Is he gone? Yes. She sat slowly on the bottom step like her legs no longer worked properly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then quietly she whispered, he never came after me before. The sentence settled heavily inside the room. Because it revealed something terrifying. Jason didn't chase people emotionally. He chased assets. And now, whatever money remained, he still believed it was inside this house. Leah slept in the guest room that night. Or at least she pretended to. Around 2 in the morning, I heard soft footsteps moving through the hallway upstairs. Then silence. Then footsteps again. Fear changes the way people move inside a house. Quieter. Careful. Like they're afraid even the walls might betray them. I sat awake in Walter's recliner with a blanket over my lap and Benny asleep beside my feet while snow pressed softly against the windows outside. The house felt different now. Not broken. Alert. Like something inside it had finally woken up. At 6:30 the next morning, I found Leah standing alone in the kitchen staring out the back window with a cup of untouched coffee in her hands. She looked exhausted. Not from lack of sleep. From realization. That kind of exhaustion sits deeper. I kept thinking he'd fix it, she whispered before I even spoke. I stayed quiet. People tell truth more honestly when silence doesn't rush them. He always had another explanation. She laughed weakly. Another investor. Another business deal. Another promise. Morning light spread softly across the kitchen counters while snow covered Walter's old garden outside. Everything looked peaceful. That's the strange thing about betrayal. The world keeps looking normal while your life quietly collapses underneath it. Leah sat down slowly at the table. I need to show you something. She reached into her coat pocket and removed a small flash drive. My stomach tightened immediately. What is that? Jason's backup files. I stared at it. How did you get them? He asked me to hide them 2 months ago. Of course he did. Predators always store evidence close to people they believe are loyal. Leah placed the flash drive carefully onto the table like it weighed something heavy. I didn't understand most of it, she whispered. But after he disappeared last week, I looked. Fear moved quietly through me again. What did you find? Her eyes filled instantly. Mom, there are other families. I felt cold immediately. Not surprise. Confirmation. Leah swallowed hard. He kept files on people. Financial profiles. Property records. Retirement estimates. Targets. Marcus had been right from the beginning. This wasn't reckless investing. It was strategy. Leah wiped her face roughly. He researched widows specifically. The word hit me harder than I expected. Widows. Not women. Not clients. Widows. Because grief makes people vulnerable. Loneliness makes them trusting. And Jason noticed both. I stared at the flash drive sitting between us on the kitchen table. Small. Ordinary. The kind of object most people would overlook completely. And somehow it contained the truth about my family. By 9 o'clock, we sat inside Robert's office while Marcus uploaded the files onto a secured laptop. Nobody spoke much while folders opened across the screen. Bank records. Wire transfers. Photos. Scanned driver's licenses. Property valuations. The deeper Marcus searched, the quieter the room became. Then he stopped suddenly. There. Robert leaned closer. What is it? Marcus clicked open another folder labeled Holloway Family. My chest tightened instantly. Inside were photographs of my house, my car, copies of Walter's obituary, insurance estimates, retirement account projections, even notes. I stared at the screen while nausea crawled slowly upward inside me. He documented us, I whispered. Marcus nodded grimly. One typed note read, widow emotionally isolated after spouse death. Daughter highly persuadable. Strong property equity potential. I couldn't breathe for a second. Not because the words sounded cruel. Because they sounded clinical. Calculated. Like our family had been reduced to numbers on an investment sheet. Leah covered her mouth with trembling hands. Oh my God, Marcus kept scrolling. Another note appeared. Potential competency narrative viable within 12 to 18 months. Robert cursed quietly under his breath. I understood immediately. Jason planned this long before Thanksgiving. Long before the forged signatures. Long before the supplements. He wasn't reacting to opportunity. He was building toward it slowly. Carefully. Like a man constructing a bridge into someone else's life. Then Marcus opened another folder. This one froze the entire room. Audio recordings. Dozens of them. Dated. Organized. I stared at the screen. What are those? Marcus clicked one file. Jason's voice filled the conference room immediately. Clear. Calm. Manipulative. Diane's becoming more forgetful lately. I'm worried she may not be safe managing finances alone. My stomach dropped. Another recording played. She trusts me completely now. Leah barely questions anything anymore. Leah started crying quietly beside me. But Marcus kept going. Another file. We'll move the remaining assets after the medical paperwork's finalized. The room fell completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Because suddenly, this was no longer suspicion. No longer fear. No longer instinct. It was evidence. Real. Cold. Undeniable. I looked at Leah slowly. She looked shattered. Not defensive anymore. Not confused. Just shattered. He recorded everything, she whispered. Predators love records. Records help them maintain control. Marcus paused another audio file halfway through and looked toward Robert. We need law enforcement involved immediately. Robert nodded once. I agree. Fear moved through me instantly again. Because police meant headlines. Statements. Public exposure. And no mother dreams about sitting in a police station explaining how her daughter married a professional manipulator. Leah suddenly looked at me desperately. Mom. I didn't know. I believed her. That was the tragedy. Jason hadn't needed her intelligence. Only her loyalty. I reached for her hand quietly. I know. And I did. Because manipulated people don't wake up all at once. They wake up slowly. Painfully. One lie at a time. Marcus continued reviewing files while Robert stepped into the hallway to contact federal investigators connected to the financial fraud cases in Nevada. Federal investigators. The phrase barely felt real. 2 months earlier, I was baking casseroles for church fundraisers. Now my family sat inside legal offices discussing organized fraud investigations. Life changes quietly. Then suddenly, Marcus opened one final folder. His expression changed immediately. What? I asked softly. He turned the laptop slightly toward us. Plane tickets. International. Multiple destinations. Bahamas. Belize. Costa Rica. Purchased 48 hours earlier. Jason was preparing to run. Not someday. Now. Marcus looked directly at Robert as he returned to the room. He's leaving the country. Leah's face lost all color instantly. Because suddenly reality became final. Jason wasn't trying to save their marriage. Or recover the money. Or explain anything. He was escaping. And he planned to do it alone. Leah stared at the screen while tears slid silently down her face. Then quietly she whispered something that broke my heart more than everything else combined. He never loved me at all. No one answered. Because sometimes silence is kinder than truth spoken aloud. And deep down, We all already knew the answer. By midnight, federal investigators were already involved. That sentence still feels unreal when I say it out loud. Federal investigators. Not because our family had become important. Because Jason had done this too many times before. Marcus explained everything quietly while Robert organized documents across the conference table. The recordings. The forged paperwork. The financial transfers. The false medical narrative. Every piece fit together now like something carefully constructed over years. And somehow, that hurt worse than chaos would have. Because chaos can be accidental. Planning cannot. Leah sat silently beside me, wrapped in one of Robert's office blankets, staring at nothing. Shock changes people physically. She looked smaller somehow. Quieter. Like her body no longer knew how to carry itself without Jason telling it what direction to move. At around 1:30 in the morning, Marcus received a phone call. He listened for less than 30 seconds before ending it. Then he looked directly at Leah. Jason tried withdrawing cash from a private banking account at Port Columbus. My stomach tightened immediately. He's at the airport? Marcus nodded once. He's moving faster than expected. Leah's hands began trembling again. He's really leaving. Not asking. Realizing. Marcus stood immediately. Federal agents are already coordinating with airport security. The room became very still. Because suddenly this story no longer belonged only to our family. Now it belonged to police reports, fraud divisions, evidence files, and, somewhere beneath all of it, grief. Not for Jason. For the life we thought we had. Leah looked up slowly. Will they arrest him? Nobody answered immediately. Finally, Robert said quietly, probably. Leah closed her eyes. One tear slid down her face silently. Not because she still believed in him. Because loving someone who never truly existed leaves a strange kind of grief behind. At 2:15 in the morning, Marcus's phone rang again. This time, his expression changed the moment he answered. Understood, he said quietly. Then he hung up. He's in custody. The words settled heavily into the room. Not dramatic. Heavy. Like a door closing somewhere far away. Leah covered her mouth instantly. For one awful second, I thought she might defend him again. Instead, she whispered, he actually tried to leave me. That was the part her heart still struggled to accept. Not the fraud. Not the lies. Abandonment. Because manipulators train people to believe their partners right up until escape becomes necessary. Marcus sat back down slowly. They stopped him before boarding. Multiple warrants were already active in Nevada and Arizona connected to financial fraud investigations. I stared at the table quietly. All those years. All those dinners. All those polished conversations about investments and success. And underneath it, a man already running from other lives. Leah suddenly looked physically ill. I introduced him to you, she whispered. I turned toward her. Sweetheart, no, her voice cracked sharply. I brought him into this family. Pain moved across her face differently now. Not confusion anymore. Responsibility. And mothers know that look instantly. It's the same expression children wear after realizing some mistakes cannot be undone with apologies. I reached for her hand gently. You were manipulated. I signed the papers. You trusted your husband. That doesn't excuse it. No, it didn't. But pain and guilt are not always the same thing. Silence settled over the office again while snow continued falling outside. Then Marcus spoke quietly. There's one more issue we need to prepare for. I looked up. What now? Media exposure. Of course. Large fraud cases involving multiple states eventually attract attention. Especially when older victims are involved. Leah looked horrified immediately. Emma can't see this online. Emma. My granddaughter. The only person in this story who stayed innocent through all of it. I suddenly realized we still hadn't told her the truth. Not really. She thinks we just lost the house, Leah whispered weakly. Marcus nodded carefully. She needs to hear it from family before reporters distort it. The thought exhausted me instantly. I was tired of explaining betrayal. Tired of repeating lies out loud until they sounded real. By the time we finally left Robert's office, dawn had already begun softening the sky outside. Columbus looked strangely peaceful beneath fresh snow. Coffee shops opening. Streetlights fading. People beginning ordinary mornings while our family quietly collapsed behind legal paperwork and fraud reports. Leah rode home with me silently. Halfway there, she suddenly asked, "Did Dad know?" I kept my eyes on the road. "I think he suspected enough to worry." She nodded slowly, then whispered, "He tried warning me." Yes. Tears filled her eyes again. "I thought he just didn't like Jason." "No," I said softly. Walter understood men. That silence lasted the rest of the drive. When we reached the house, Benny greeted Leah gently at the door like he already understood she was broken. Animals always know. Leah stood in the kitchen afterwards staring at old family photographs hanging near the dining room. One picture stopped her completely. Walter beside Jason at a summer barbecue years earlier. Both smiling. Both holding fishing poles. Jason looked normal. Trustworthy. That's the frightening part about predators. They rarely look dangerous in photographs. Leah touched the edge of the frame carefully. I can't tell what was real anymore. I understood that feeling. After Walter died, I spent months replaying old conversations wondering if I missed signs his health was worsening. Grief makes people revisit memories like detectives, searching for clues they failed to notice in real time. Some of it was real, I said quietly. She looked at me. The parts involving you and Emma were real. Because manipulative people still create genuine moments sometimes. That's what traps victims. If every moment were terrible, nobody would stay. Leah sat down slowly at the kitchen table. What happens now? I looked around the house. Walter's old coffee mug beside the sink. Snow falling softly outside. Benny asleep near the heater vent. The same home. The same life. And yet everything had changed. Now, I said quietly, we rebuild what's left. Not the money. Some losses never return financially. But dignity. Truth. Safety. Those things still mattered. Leah lowered her eyes toward the table. I don't know how to forgive myself. I understood that too. Because betrayal damages victims differently than outsiders realize. The worst pain isn't always losing money. Sometimes it's realizing how long you defended someone who was destroying you. I made tea while morning light slowly filled the kitchen. For the first time in weeks, the house felt quiet again. Not fearful quiet. Healing quiet. The kind that comes after truth finally enters a room. Then my phone buzzed softly on the counter. A message from Marcus. 3 words. He confessed everything. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then slowly set the phone back down beside Walter's old coffee mug. And for the first time since Thanksgiving, I finally believed this nightmare might actually end. 3 months later, spring finally returned to Ohio. The snow melted slowly first. Then the trees behind my house began turning green again. Then one morning, I opened the kitchen window while making coffee and realized I could hear birds. Instead of silence. Real silence. Not the fearful kind that haunted this house all winter. Peaceful silence. The kind that arrives after truth finishes destroying everything false. A lot happened during those 3 months. Jason accepted a plea agreement connected to multiple fraud investigations across 3 states. Marcus later explained that federal prosecutors already had years of evidence before our case even surfaced. We were never the beginning. Just the family where everything finally collapsed. Most of the money from the Maplewood house was gone forever. Offshore transfers. Fake companies. Cash withdrawals. The investigators recovered a portion of it eventually, but not enough to restore what Walter's family built over 4 decades. At first, that loss consumed Leah. I watched her walk through the house every morning carrying guilt like something physically attached to her shoulders. Some days she barely spoke. Some days she apologized so often I finally had to stop her. Enough, I told her gently one evening while we folded laundry together. Tears filled her eyes immediately. But Mom, no, I folded one of Walter's old flannel shirts slowly before continuing. You made terrible decisions. But terrible decisions are not the same thing as being a terrible person. She cried quietly after that. Not dramatic crying. Healing crying. The kind that comes when someone finally stops defending a lie. Emma flew home from California in March. I worried most about that conversation. How do you explain to a young woman that her entire childhood was quietly built beside manipulation? But Emma surprised both of us. She sat beside her mother at the kitchen table holding her hand while Leah told the truth about everything. The fake investments, the lies, the missing money, the fraud investigations. Emma listened silently through all of it. Then she hugged Leah and whispered, "You should have told me sooner." That was all. No screaming. No cruelty. Just sadness. And somehow sadness heals families more honestly than anger does. A few weeks later, Emma helped me clean out the guest room upstairs. While sorting old boxes, we found one of Walter's photo albums hidden in the back of the closet. Summer vacations. Birthday parties. Fishing trips at Lake Erie. Page after page of ordinary family moments. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor flipping through photographs quietly. Then suddenly she stopped. "This was before him," she whispered. I looked down. The picture showed Leah at 23 years old laughing beside Walter during a 4th of July barbecue years before she met Jason. Carefree. Bright-eyed. Unafraid. Emma touched the photo carefully. "I forgot what Mom used to look like." That sentence stayed with me for days. Because manipulation doesn't just steal money. It steals people slowly. Their confidence. Their instincts. Their personality. Until even the people who love them forget who they were before the control began. Leah started therapy in early February. At first, she hated going. Then gradually, I noticed small things changing. She laughed occasionally again. Started cooking real meals instead of picking at toast and coffee. Opened curtains in the mornings. One afternoon, I heard music playing softly upstairs while she cleaned the guest room. It was the first time I'd heard her sing in years. Healing arrives quietly too. Most people expect dramatic moments, but recovery usually sounds smaller. A laugh returning. A full night of sleep. Music behind a closed bedroom door. By April, we finally decided to visit the Maplewood property together. I wasn't sure either of us were ready. But grief avoided too long becomes another kind of prison. The new owners had planted yellow tulips near the front porch Walter built decades earlier. Children's bicycles rested beside the garage now. Life had already moved into the spaces we lost. Leah stood beside me silently at the curb staring at the house. "I thought selling it would fix everything," she whispered. I slipped my hands into my coat pockets against the cool spring wind. "No," I said gently. "You thought saving your marriage would fix everything." She nodded slowly. Tears filled her eyes again. "I destroyed Dad's house." I looked toward the old oak tree in the backyard, where Emma's initials still remained carved into the bark. Then I shook my head softly. "No," Leah looked at me. "Houses are wood," I said quietly. "Your father cared more about the people inside them." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then something unexpected happened. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not about the house. Not even about the money. Because age teaches you something strange eventually. Money rebuilds slowly. Property can be replaced. But bitterness. Bitterness becomes a second funeral if you carry it too long. So I let it go there beside the curb. Not for Jason. Not even for Leah. For myself. That evening, we drove home with the windows cracked slightly while warm spring air moved through the car. For the first time in months, the world felt open again. Later that night, after Leah went upstairs, I sat alone on the back patio wrapped in one of Walter's old blankets, while Benny slept beside my chair. The garden lights glowed softly across the yard. Somewhere nearby, wind chimes moved gently in the dark. I thought about everything that happened. How easily trust can become a doorway for the wrong person. How loneliness makes people vulnerable. How grief clouds judgment. But I also thought about something else. Survival. Because despite everything, we survived. Not perfectly. Not without scars. But we survived. My phone buzzed softly beside me around 10 o'clock. A message from Marcus. Jason received 12 years. I stared at the screen quietly for several seconds. Then I locked the phone and set it face down beside my tea. No triumph. No satisfaction. Just closure. The kind that arrives quietly after long pain. I looked up toward the second-floor guest room window, where warm light still glowed behind the curtains. Leah was up there. Safe. Alive. Beginning again. And suddenly I understood something Walter once told me years ago after a difficult season in our marriage. The strongest families aren't the ones who never break, he said. They're the ones honest enough to rebuild. At the time, I didn't fully understand him. Now I finally did. Because betrayal had entered our family like winter. Cold. Silent. Destructive. But spring came anyway. And in the end, that was the part Jason could never steal.